Welcome to this comprehensive study, providing a full summary of a truly fascinating investigation from the YouTube channel Events and History. By the way, there's a link to their original presentation right below this study, so definitely check that out when we're done. You know, we often think of the origins of major world religions as completely settled history, right? Carved in stone, perfectly mapped out, and basically impossible to change. But what happens when we apply the tools of linguistic archaeology to ancient texts? Well, sometimes pulling on just one tiny linguistic thread can unravel everything we thought we knew, literally turning our geographical and historical assumptions completely upside down. Today, we're going to act as historical detectives. We're going to neutrally examine a thought-provoking argument that tracks a single grammatical quirk to solve a massive ancient mystery. Let's dive right in.
Okay, here is the roadmap for our study today. 1. The Surah 5116 mystery. 2. The Holy Spirit as Mother. 3. Historical and Islamic sources. 4. Antioch versus Alexandria. 5. The Northern geography. And finally 6. Rethinking Islamic origins.
Section 1. The Surah 5116 mystery. A misunderstanding or a map?
For centuries, Western academics, historians, and Christian apologists have pointed to this one specific issue as a glaring historical flaw. I mean, they've used it for a long time to claim the text was wildly inaccurate. They essentially asked, how on earth could a foundational religious text address a theological concept that absolutely no mainstream Christian group ever actually believed? The tension here is palpable. If mainstream Christians fiercely protected the Trinity as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, why would early Muslims apparently assume the Virgin Mary was the third member? Was it just a colossal misunderstanding of Christian doctrine? To really get this, we have to look closely at the explicit wording of Surah 5116. It reads, "Take me and my mother for two divinities beside God." So this is a very explicit reference to Jesus and his mother. Now, if we read this through the traditional historical narrative, the one which places the origins of Islam deep in the southern deserts of Mecca, surrounded by Arab polytheists, this phrasing makes absolutely zero sense. The Christians of that era would have flatly, totally rejected the idea that Mary was a literal part of the Trinity. So what's going on here? Why is this highly specific wording used? Is it just a massive glaring error, or is there a hidden layer of meaning? Could it be a geographical and linguistic map that we have literally just been missing for centuries?
Section 2. The Holy Spirit as Mother, the linguistic clue. To crack this case, researchers like Mel, Dr. J. Smith, and scholar Edouard Marie Galez suggest we have to shift our gaze. We need to look north to the Syriac-speaking world.
And here is where the linguistic archaeology gets super fascinating. Think about the Syriac and Aramaic word for spirit, which is ruha. In these languages, ruha is grammatically feminine. Think about how languages like Spanish or French use gendered nouns, elle versus la, right? Those underlying linguistic structures subconsciously shape the way a whole culture views an object, a concept, or even a person. Unlike Latin or Greek, where the spirit is often treated as grammatically neuter or masculine, the Aramaic language naturally leaned into a feminine description for the divine spirit. This completely shifts the theological playing field. This single linguistic quirk, a feminine noun, acts as a master key to unlocking the entire verse.
So what does this actually mean in practice? It naturally leads to a profound framework. You have the Father, who is masculine, the Holy Spirit, or Ruha, who is feminine, acting as a mother, and Jesus the Son. This brilliantly illustrates how early Syriac speakers logically viewed the Trinity as a reflection of a holy family, because the word for spirit was intrinsically feminine in their language. Referring to the Holy Spirit as a mother wasn't considered bizarre, insulting, or heretical to them at all. Actually, it was simply the most beautiful, natural, and logical way to describe the relationship between God, the Spirit, and Jesus. Ancient Middle Eastern family structures perfectly mirrored their theology. They were essentially projecting the earthly family unit right up into the heavens. Section 3. Historical and Islamic sources. The evidence unveiled. Now, we aren't just going to take modern historians' words for this. To remain completely objective, we need to dive into the primary ancient texts ourselves.
Let's actually listen to the exact words of the Acts of Thomas, an ancient Gnostic text. It says, "We glorify and praise thee and thine invisible Father and thine Holy Spirit, the mother of all creation." Let those ancient voices just speak for themselves for a second. This text comes from Edessa, which was a major hub of early Syriac Christianity in what is now modern Turkey. It explicitly proves that in this specific northern region, linking the Holy Spirit to motherhood wasn't just a theory, it was a well-established written practice.
And the evidence keeps piling up. We also see the highly influential early church theologian Origen quoting a lost text, the Gospel according to the Hebrews. Now, this was a text utilized heavily by sects of Judeo-Nazarenes. Origen quotes Jesus himself reportedly saying, "A moment ago my mother, who is the Holy Spirit, took me away by one of my hair and carried me to the great mountain of Tabor." So here again we have massive, prominent figures in the early Christian world explicitly capturing the phrasing, "my mother, the Holy Spirit." It proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that this concept was actively circulating in antiquity.
Then we jump over to Mosul in the 4th century, where the Syriac Christian author Afrahat writes, "The Christian who marries tends to forget his father and the Holy Spirit, his mother." Now, who was Afrahat? He was one of the most important writers in early Syriac Christianity. By painting this picture of 4th century Mosul, we realize we aren't just talking about some fringe belief confined to a tiny obscure cult somewhere. Not at all. This was a deeply ingrained linguistic and theological tradition across the massive northern Syriac world. Spanning hundreds of miles and several centuries, millions of Christians spoke and thought exactly this way.
But perhaps the absolute most surprising piece of evidence comes from within Islamic tradition itself. Highly respected 9th and 10th century Muslim commentators. We're talking about giant historical figures like al-Tabari, al-Baydawi, al-Zamakhshari, and al-Jalalain. They actually agree that Surah 5:116 is referring to the Holy Spirit, not the Virgin Mary. The irony here is just incredible. While modern Western critics often completely miss this northern Syriac context, these brilliant early Islamic scholars perfectly understood it. They recognized that Christians didn't view Mary as part of the Trinity, meaning the text simply had to be addressing the Holy Spirit. They effectively confirmed the Syriac interpretation hundreds of years ago.
Section 4. Antioch versus Alexandria, the theological battleground. So, if the passage is definitely about the Holy Spirit as mother, what specific theological dispute is being documented here?
The authors of our study propose that Surah 5:116 is actually a brilliant polemic mocking the tritheism of Antiochian Christians. To really wrap our heads around this, let me give you a quick analogy. Imagine a single pool of water. The Alexandrian Christians viewed God exactly like that single, indivisible pool of water, emphasizing extreme unity. On the flip side, the Antiochians, heavily influenced by Greek philosophy, viewed the Trinity more like 3 entirely separate ice cubes. They pushed so hard on the distinct individual properties of the Father, Son, and Spirit that they were constantly accused of tritheism, literally believing in 3 separate gods. And remember, these were not polite disagreements over tea. These were fierce, bitter, empire-shaking battles over the fundamental nature of reality itself.
Therefore, the argument goes that the text is not attacking the Trinity itself, but rather mocking the concept of tritheism. The verse isn't some clumsy misunderstanding about the Virgin Mary. Actually, scratch that. It's more like a precise, razor-sharp, targeted theological burn. It demands that Christians not confuse emanations of the one God with completely separate polytheistic deities. It is essentially interrogating Christians of the Antioch tradition, directly asking, are you treating God, Jesus, and the Mother Spirit as 3 completely separate gods? This is an absolute revelation. The verse aligns perfectly with the Alexandrian side of this intense ancient Christian debate.
Section 5. The Northern Geography, Mapping the Mystery. Okay, so if this verse is so perfectly intertwined with Syriac language and specific theological rivalries, where does it physically belong on a map?
Well, when we take these primary sources, figures, and texts, and we plot them geographically, a startling pattern immediately emerges. Look at this. Afrahat is in Mosul, Iraq. Origen and Jerome are tied to Caesarea, Alexandria, Jerusalem, and Bethlehem, across Palestine and Egypt. The Acts of Thomas is centered up in Edessa, in modern-day Turkey and Syria. Every single one of these primary texts and the bitter theological battlegrounds over tritheism is located deep in the northern Fertile Crescent. These conversations were deeply and almost exclusively anchored in northern urban centers.
And this reveals a profound geographical twist. These highly specific, intellectually nuanced debates simply were not happening down south in the Hijaz region of Mecca and Medina. The source study notes that these debates occurred an astonishing 600 to 1,200 miles north of Mecca. To put that into perspective, in the ancient world, that distance is absolutely massive. It's like a different planet. How could a highly localized, deeply specific debate from the distant north end up being perfectly critiqued in a text supposedly born in the isolated southern deserts? Furthermore, these nuanced Syriac allusions require an audience intimately familiar with northern Aramaic traditions, an audience that historians tell us simply did not exist in the Deep South at that time.
Section 6. Rethinking Islamic Origins, the Grand Conclusion.
Let's methodically walk through this timeline to truly grasp the implications of this full summary. Back in the 3rd and 4th centuries, Syriac texts formally established the mother spirit concept. Then jump forward to 616 AD, where a major synod in Alexandria officially condemned Antiochian tritheism. Think about what 616 AD means in world history. This exact northern theological debate was raging at its absolute peak, just decades before the formalization of Islamic texts under the Caliph, Abd al-Malik, in the late 7th century. The timeline and the geography align perfectly, solidifying the thesis that these ideas originated much further north, deeply embedded in a lively, ongoing debate among Judeo-Nazarene and Christian groups.
So if the intense debates chronicled in Surah 5:116 actually happened in the north, where does the true history of Islam really begin? This study leaves us with a profound sense of awe about how much of human history is still hidden just beneath the surface, practically waiting for the right linguistic key to unlock it. If this verse is a literal map pointing to a northern Christian dispute, how much of the early origin story is waiting to be uncovered in the sands of Syria and Iraq? If you found this investigation as eye-opening as I did, be sure to check out the link to the original events and history investigation below. Never stop questioning the incredible layers of our shared past.